What do you do when nothing makes sense anymore? We grow up expecting answers. Stories give us arcs, justice, catharsis. Religions offer purpose. Families tell us who we are. Schools hand out grades to measure our worth. It's always supposed to be a reason for pain, for effort, for why we wake up and do it all again tomorrow. But then life happens, and suddenly the story doesn't make sense anymore. A loss that shatters you. A future you thought you wanted dissolving into dust. An overwhelming feeling of what's the point? Not in a dramatic, self-destructive way, but in a quiet, aching confusion. This is existential dread. Not fear of death, but fear of meaninglessness. It's that empty space where the old reasons used to be. It's waking up and realizing no one is going to tell you who to be or why it matters. That you can do everything right and still feel hollow. That life doesn't guarantee a plot twist that redeems your pain. And yet, maybe that absence isn't a void. Maybe it's a doorway. 'Cause if nothing is predetermined, then everything is possible. The universe doesn't assign your meaning. That means you're free to create it yourself. That's what this video is about. It's not despair, not cynicism, but freedom. This is the heart of existentialism, a philosophy that doesn't try to comfort you with illusions, but invites you to live honestly without them. You are free. And that is terrifying, but also, maybe, just maybe, liberating. Because in a world that doesn't hand you a script, you get to write one. The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. Albert Camus, at the core of existentialism, is a paradox. We crave meaning, and yet the universe doesn't owe us one. This tension, this ache between desire for purpose and a silent cosmos, is what philosopher Albert Camus called the absurd. It's not a flaw in us, and it's not a cruelty of the world. The key is simply what happens when we realize there's no automatic reason, no grand design guiding our suffering, no divine author turning our pain into poetry. Anime, perhaps more than any other medium, knows how to capture this tension. It's in the stillness between battles, in a dreamlike silence after a character breaks down, in the space where meaning should be distant. Let's start with Ayanami Rei from Neon Genesis Evangelion. Rei is introduced not as a person, but as a tool, a clone, brick, an empty vessel. Identity is crafted by others. Gendo, NERV, the forces trying to resurrect a god. She doesn't speak unless spoken to. She doesn't move unless commanded. Her existence is utilitarian, and yet, within that emptiness, something begins to stir. Rei starts to ask questions. She begins to wonder who she is outside of her role. She forms faint attachments to Shinji, to small moments of autonomy, to the possibility that she might choose her own path. And by the time she sacrifices herself in the original series, it isn't just out of duty, it's an act of choice, a rejection of the fate others assign to her. Her rebellion isn't loud. It isn't heroic, it's existential. In a world that told her she was nothing but a function, she chose to be. Camus would have called this the first step toward freedom. Now, contrast that with Homura Akemi from Puella Magi Madoka Madoka, a character so trapped in repetition, so suffocated by a universe that punishes hope that her very existence becomes absurd. Homura lives in a time loop. She watches Madoka die again and again. No matter what she tries, it isn't enough. She isn't strong enough, fast enough, good enough. The laws of the universe mock her efforts. Magic always comes with a cost, and love always ends in grief. And still, Homura continues, not because it makes sense, not because she expects a reward, but because, in her eyes, there is no alternative. She chooses to keep trying, to endure the absurdity, to resist the silence. That is the essence of Camus' vision in the myth of Sisyphus. The idea that even if life is a boulder, we must endlessly push up a hill. The act of pushing, of choosing, of resisting is what makes us human. And maybe even what makes us free. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Camus, Homura is not happy, but she is committed, and in a way, that's braver. The absurd isn't about nihilism. It's not nothing matters. It's nothing inherently matters. So what will you decide matters anyway? This is where anime shines. In those quiet, uncertain spaces where characters keep moving forward, not because the story demands it, but because they do. When Rei opens her eyes and says, "I am me," when Homura reloads her weapon for the 1000th time, when a character persists after the narrative collapses, these moments whisper something profound. The world may not offer you meaning, but you can offer it something back. You, your choices, your defiance, your being. Camus once wrote, "The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion." That's what these characters represent. Not the chosen one, not the hero, but the self-authored life. It's the soul that stares into the absurd and says, "I will live anyway." Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Jean-Paul Sartre. Freedom sounds beautiful until you feel it. We imagine freedom as light pouring in through a window, as wings, as the ability to go anywhere and be anything. But the truth is, radical freedom is terrifying. It's not the absence of barriers, it's the presence of infinite responsibility. No one is coming to tell you what matters. No one is coming to choose for you. Every path you take, and every one you don't, is now your burden to carry. Sartre called this existential anguish. The feeling that hits you when you realize you are the author of your life, and you can't hand a pen to anyone else. In anime, this is rarely framed as a speech. It's a scream, refusal, a quiet, trembling moment where a character steps away from everything they've been told, chooses something else, even when it costs them everything. Let's start with someone who's carried more than most. Guts from Berserk. Guts is born from death. Literally, his first breath comes beneath a hanged corpse. He's raised by a mercenary who teaches him only violence. So from his first moments, Guts is treated not as a child, but as a weapon, a tool, a means to an end. He doesn't grow up with stories about who he could become. He grows up with survival. And then he meets Griffith, charismatic, visionary, a man with a dream so powerful it bends others toward him like gravity. For a time, Guts feels he has a place in that dream, a role, a purpose. And yet, something inside him never fully submits, 'cause Griffith's dream, no matter how glorious, isn't his. There's a pivotal moment when Guts hears Griffith say, "A true friend would be someone who has their own dream," since something clicks. For the first time in his life, Guts sees freedom, not as betrayal, but as necessity. He walks away from the band of the Hawk, from safety, from the only belonging he's ever known, because he refuses to live someone else's story. That moment is pure existentialism. It isn't triumphant, it isn't clean, but it is real. Guts chooses uncertainty over comfort, loneliness over illusion, agency over being defined. You are free, and that is terrifying. Because once you choose to live by your own terms, you can no longer blame anyone else for what comes next. Guts' path isn't noble, it's brutal. He loses almost everything. But that's the point Sartre makes. Freedom is not the same as happiness. It's a burden, but it's yours. And only through owning it can you begin to feel real. If Guts shows us the anguish of freedom, Boji from Ranking of Kings shows us its quiet courage. Boji is born into a world that immediately decides he is unfit to lead. He is deaf, small, gentle, the kind of boy fairy tales usually exclude from the throne room. Everyone around him tells him what a king should be: strong, commanding, ruthless when needed. Boji listens. He smiles. And then he does something remarkable. He doesn't become what they expect. He becomes something else. Not through defiance, but through softness. Not through dominance, but through authenticity. Boji's strength isn't physical. It's relational. He connects. He heals. He believes in people, even when they don't believe in him. He listens when others shout. He leads, not by being feared, but by being felt. And in doing so, he reframes what power is. This is the other side of existential choice. Not the agonizing rupture of walking away like guts, but the daily courage of remaining yourself in a world that wants you to be something else. Boji never rages against the script others write for him. He simply refuses to read from it. This, too, is freedom. And yet, it's not easy. Sartre wasn't romantic about free will. He called it a condemnation, because the moment we realize no one is going to make our decisions for us, we also realize something terrifying. There is no one left to blame. It's easier to think you are meant for something, that fate is guiding you, that someone else is driving the car and you're just the passenger. But when the wheel is in your hands, you feel everything. The fear of choosing wrong, the pressure to make it count, the agony of knowing there is no blueprint for how to live well, only your best guess. This is where people freeze, where they stop choosing at all. 'Cause if everything is your responsibility, what if you fail? Okay? That's the shadow side of Boji's softness and of Gut's independence. Both of them suffer deeply for stepping off the path. Both of them are misunderstood, mocked, alone, and still they continue. 'Cause here's what Sartre meant when he said, we're condemned to be free. Not that freedom is punishment, but that it's inevitable. You can't run from it. Even not choosing is still a choice. You cannot not choose. Even in refusing to act, you are still deciding. Sartre. So the question becomes, if you're going to carry the burden anyway, why not carry it with intention? One of the most dangerous things we do, especially when we feel lost, is wait for permission. Permission to change. Permission to rest. Permission to define our own version of success. But no one is going to give it to you. Not your family, not your culture. It's not even the story you think you're supposed to be living. If Guts waited for permission to leave Griffith, he'd still be marching towards someone else's dream. If Boji waited for the world to see him as worthy, he'd still be hiding behind a bigger sword. Existential freedom means realizing you already have the right to decide who you are. But it also means realizing no one else will validate that choice for you. Not always. And that's where the terror comes in. Because we want to be told we're doing it right, that our path is okay, that our softness, our strength, our strange way of moving through the world is enough. And yet, the truest paths often start with a no one understands you yet. Existential authenticity, living in alignment with your inner values, is often lonely before it is liberating. But that loneliness isn't punishment. It's the clearing of space for a life that actually fits. There's a quote often misattributed to Camus, but it still captures the heart of this act. In the midst of winter, I found there was, within me, an invincible summer. To choose your own way is not to walk in sunlight all the time. It's often cold, it's quiet, uncertain, but there's also something else, something warmer. When you stop waiting for the world to give you a story, you begin to hear your own voice, faint at first, then clearer. And that voice doesn't ask, what should I do? It asks, what do I want to create? That is the question existentialism leaves us with. And that is the question Boji and Guts both answer in their own way. They are nothing alike. And yet, both of them live authored lives. Not perfect, not pain-free, but real. And that, more than victory, more than redemption, might be the only kind of meaning worth chasing. The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. Michel de Montaigne. Freedom brings with it an unsettling realization. No matter how many people you love, how deeply you're known, or how fully you belong, no one else can live your life for you. This is existential isolation. It's not the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone, but the deeper kind, the knowledge that your inner world, your choices, your meaning will always be uniquely yours. That even when you're surrounded, you are still, ultimately, a solitary self. At first glance, this seems like a tragedy. But what if it's not? What if being alone, truly alone, is what makes your connection to others meaningful? What if the very act of building your own meaning is the reason anyone sees you at all? In Serial Experiments Lane, identity is unstable. Lane begins as a shy, disconnected girl, someone others barely register. But as her consciousness merges with the virtual world known as the wired, the boundaries between self and other begin to blur. Multiple versions of Lane appear. Memories shift, realities fracture. Is she a god, a program, a figment? Even she isn't sure. But underneath the cyberpunk aesthetic and philosophical fragmentation is a simpler question. What does it mean to be someone? Your sense of self can be altered by memory, erased by technology, or redefined by others. What makes you real? Lane's journey isn't about defeating an enemy or restoring order. It's about claiming a self, even when the world around her and inside her is constantly shifting. And perhaps the most terrifying moment is when she realizes no one else can answer the question for her. She must choose what kind of person she wants to be, not just in the eyes of others, but to herself. Existential isolation is woven into every moment of Lane. Even when she's connected to everyone, she feels alone. Even when she has infinite access to minds and memories, she feels unseen. That's the paradox. Connection doesn't erase solitude. Sometimes it even intensifies it, because when you start to construct meaning for yourself, when you start living outside the script, it becomes harder for people to meet you where you are. But it also becomes more possible to be truly seen, because no one can witness the truth of you unless you're brave enough to first witness it yourself. If Lane represents the dissolution of identity, then Thorfinn from Vinland Saga represents what happens after the identity dies. For years, Thorfinn lives for one thing: revenge. He trains, kills, follows Askeladd across blood-soaked fields, believing that someday a duel will give him closure. But when that chance is ripped from him, when Askeladd dies at someone else's hands, Thorfinn's reason to live disappears. There is no catharsis, no meaning, only emptiness. That's where most stories would end. But Vinland Saga is not a story about vengeance. It's a story about what comes after. Thorfinn doesn't find a new dream overnight. He doesn't heal because of a motivational speech or a new purpose falling into his lap. He just keeps going. He works on a farm. He chops wood, tries to understand what it means to live a life that isn't built on violence. It's slow, unrewarding, and deeply alone. Because here's the truth: when you walk away from the identity others assigned to you, even if it was one built on pain, you lose their recognition. People don't always know how to connect with the quiet version of you. The rebuilding you, it's the one who has no dramatic arc, just existence. And yet, in that quiet, something shifts. Thorfinn starts to feel, starts to connect, not through force, but presence. Not through performance, but integrity. He stops living to be understood and starts living to be real. That's the paradox of existential isolation. The more personal your path becomes, the more universal it actually is. Because people don't resonate with your perfection, they resonate with your truth. There is a loneliness that comes with freedom, but it's not the kind that means something's wrong. It's the loneliness of saying, I don't know where I'm going, but I refuse to follow just to feel safe. It's the moment when you walk away from a belief system that no longer fits, when you end a relationship that no longer reflects who you are, when you stop pretending you're okay and risk being misunderstood. Everyone is alone. But if you let that terrify you, you miss the chance to connect anyway. 'Cause connection is not the opposite of solitude. It's what you find inside it. It's easy to belong when you're playing a role others understand. But true intimacy requires showing up as you are without guarantee. When Lane refuses to disappear into the wired. When Thorfinn lays down his sword. When a character chooses peace over revenge or truth over approval. They are stepping into existential visibility. They are not asking to be liked. They are asking to be seen. And that is a risk. But also a gift. Many of us were raised to believe that if we're good enough, we'll be loved. If we're strong enough, we'll be admired. If we're quiet or helpful or successful, we'll finally feel connected. But those are all roles, scripts, conditions. Existentialism strips them away. It says, no one can validate your meaning. Not fully. That doesn't mean you're unworthy. It means you're free. But freedom, again, is terrifying. It means creating meaning that may go unrecognized. It's loving people who may not love you back. Building a life that no one else applauds, but feels right in your bones. It means walking into a room and being okay if no one claps. It means waking up and choosing peace, even if it looks like giving up to someone else. It means being misunderstood, but not abandoned by yourself. And here's the surprising part. The more honestly you live your truth, the more clearly you see others. Because the path to being known begins not with performance, but with permission. The permission to be flawed, to be uncertain, to be alive in the rawest sense of the word. When you claim your meaning, even if it isolates you, you make it possible for someone else to say, I feel that too. Connection doesn't require conformity. It requires courage. To show up, to speak honestly, to keep choosing, even when no one claps. Meaning is personal, and therefore, yes, often lonely. But that loneliness is a threshold. On the other side of it, it's a life that is truly yours, okay? In a rare, beautiful moments, it will echo in someone else's chest, okay? Not because you followed the crowd, okay? But because you didn't. To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself. Scrand, Kierkegaard, Scrand. What do you do when there's no map? When the roles you were handed no longer fit? Quit. The version of you others expect. The achiever, the caretaker, the quiet one, starts to feel more like a cage than a compass. Existentialism doesn't offer certainty. It offers authenticity. It doesn't say, here's who you are. It says, here's the silence. Now speak, but speaking from the self, from your real values, your real fears, your real voice. Is difficult when you've spent years trying to be what others needed. To live authentically means building a life without a script, not because you've rejected everything you were given, but because you're finally choosing it for yourself. It's not about rebellion for its own sake. It's about returning slowly, gently, to what feels true. And no character models is better than Mob, from Mob Psycho 100. Mob starts off as a blank slate, emotionless, unthreatening, repressed. He's told directly and indirectly that his emotions are dangerous, that his power must be controlled, that being calm and agreeable is the safest way to exist, so he complies. He hides everything, rage, sadness, desire, fear, behind a gentle mask into the world that makes him good, obedient, harmless. But internally, Mob is screaming. His power doesn't vanish. It just builds, quietly, tightly, until it explodes, seemingly at random. This is the cost of emotional suppression. You don't stop feeling, you just stop processing. And that backlog eventually breaks something, okay? Mob's journey is not about unlocking more strength, okay? He's already the strongest in the show. It's about learning to feel without shame. The turning point comes not when Mob fights harder, but when he starts to cry. It's when he starts to say what he wants. When he allows himself to feel love, embarrassment, insecurity, and still move forward anyway. Because real maturity isn't measured by emotional control. It's measured by emotional integration. Mob learns that strength isn't silence, it's softness without collapse, power without pretense. He stops being the version of himself others found safe, starts becoming someone he himself can trust. That is authenticity, not performance, not rebellion, alignment. If Mob teaches us that emotional authenticity is strength, then Shouko Nishimiya from A Silent Voice shows us that worth is something we choose, not something we wait to be given. Kako is bullied for being deaf, isolated, mocked, treated as less than for something she cannot control. And for most of her life, she internalizes that treatment. She believes, quietly, devastatingly, that she is a burden. That her pain makes others uncomfortable. That she is only lovable if she stays small, compliant, apologetic. She says sorry constantly, even when it's not her fault, especially when it's not. 'Cause when the world teaches you that your needs are too much, you begin to apologize just for existing. But over time, and through deeply painful moments, Shouko begins to change. Not because someone rescues her, not because someone fixes her, but because she starts to choose herself. She begins to reach out, to express anger, to ask for connection, instead of assuming she's unworthy of it. It's quiet, slow growth, but it's real. And maybe the most important moment is this: she doesn't wait until she's healed to reach out. She doesn't wait until she feels worthy to begin loving again. She starts in the middle, raw, scared, imperfect, and she tries anyway. There's no map, but there can still be direction. One you carve with your own hands. Shouko doesn't need the world to declare her worthy. She decides she is, and that decision, that existential affirmation, is more powerful than any external validation ever could be. It's easy to think of authenticity as a mood, something you feel when the conditions are right, when you're alone or safe or in the company of people who truly understand you. But real authenticity shows up when it's inconvenient, when saying no means losing approval, when choosing peace means disappointing others, when following your own rhythm means falling behind in someone else's race. Authenticity isn't easy. It often looks like regression, like slowing down, like weakness, but it's none of those things. It's refusal to abandon your truth just because it doesn't make sense to others. Mob refusing to suppress his heart just to appear stable. Shouko refusing to erase herself to keep others comfortable. This is what Kierkegaard meant when he said, "To dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself, because the cost of inauthenticity is slow, silent disappearance. You become a version of yourself that is palatable, it's predictable, praiseworthy, but not you. And eventually, even the praise stops meaning anything, because deep down, you know it wasn't earned through honesty, but performance." There is no pre-written path for healing, no linear journey to authenticity, no 5-step plan for becoming fully yourself. And that's okay, because the goal isn't to arrive at some ideal version of you. The goal is to be with yourself in all seasons, in all states, to listen to the quiet voice that says, "I don't know where I'm going, but I know this isn't it." Or, "I want something gentler," even if no one else understands. That voice is not weakness, it's not regression, it's not failure. It's you, remembering yourself. It's the part that exists beneath identity, beneath roles, beneath what you were taught to be. It's the part that's always been there, just waiting to be trusted again. Existentialism is often seen as bleak, a life without external meaning, a world where we must invent our own purpose. But look at Mob, look at Shouko, at the people in your own life who have made quiet, courageous choices to live more honestly, even when no one else clapped. There is something sacred about self-chosen meaning, about becoming your own witness, about deciding that your life doesn't have to look right to feel right. You don't need a map, you need a compass. And sometimes that compass points toward letting go. Other times, toward reclaiming what you thought you'd lost. But always, always, it points back to you. Not the self they told you to be, but the self you remember when everything else falls away. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Albert Camus. What if you never get the answers? K. What if the closure never comes? The purpose never appears. The world never bends itself to make your suffering feel worth it. In most stories, we're taught to expect payoff. That pain leads to meaning. That if we suffer long enough, we'll be rewarded. That there's a reason. Always. But real life doesn't always work that way. In some anime, the bravest ones tell us the truth most stories avoid. There may be no grand reason. There may be no chosen destiny. There may just be you, your breath, your body, your next small step. Okay, that can be enough. Camus' myth of Sisyphus is often misunderstood. It's not a tale of despair. It's a radical refusal. Sisyphus is cursed to roll a boulder up a hill forever. No reward, no end, no applause. It's just effort, repetition, and gravity. Camus says he must be imagined as happy. Why? Because the gods may have stolen his outcome, but they couldn't touch his choice. Sisyphus accepts the absurd, and in doing so, he becomes free. There's no victory in a traditional sense, but there is power in continuing anyway. This is the final act of existentialism. Not rebellion, not anger, but acceptance without submission. A quiet, enduring yes. Look at the anime characters we've followed throughout this video. They aren't victorious in the ways we've been taught to admire. They don't always win. They're not always healed. They're often exhausted, fragmented, unfinished, but they continue. Okay, and in that continuation is something deeper than triumph. It's authorship. Rei Ayanami. Rei was created to be used, to be erased and replaced. A copy of a copy. A placeholder for someone else's idea of value. But in the end, she makes a choice. Not because it saves the world, but because it's hers. She doesn't scream. She doesn't fight. She simply becomes someone who can say no. In a world that built her to say yes forever, that's an act of rebellion. That's freedom. Homura Akemi. Homura doesn't win. She loops endlessly, loses Madoka again and again, carries the weight of time like a second skin, but she doesn't stop. It's because meaning, for her, isn't guaranteed. It's chosen. Her suffering doesn't promise redemption, but she endures because she cares. And caring, in an uncaring universe, is power. Not flashy, not rewarded, but real. There's a quiet kind of strength in continuing without guarantee. It's not because it feels good, not because someone's watching, but because something inside you, however faint, believes the next step still matters. This is the existential reframe. Maybe there's no meaning waiting for you. Maybe it's waiting within you. We spend so much of our lives looking outward, trying to find the story that explains us, the person who completes us, the role that finally makes everything click. The most radical truth is this: you were never powerless. You were just free. In freedom, when you've been taught to obey, to please, to wait, can feel like terror, because there's no one left to blame, no script to follow. It's just you and the page. You don't need to be chosen to matter. You don't need a prophecy. You don't need a hidden talent. You don't need to prove your worth by saving the world or surviving it perfectly. You don't need to have all the answers to take the next step, because this isn't a story, and you are not a character arc. You are a person, and people are messy. People contradict themselves. People fall apart, build back up, and fall again, all before noon. And that's not a failure of meaning, like safe. It's easy to think that meaning must be found, like treasure, or granted, like a blessing, or inherited, like a script. But meaning isn't a thing you get. It's a thing you grow. Okay? Like weeds through pavement. Like warmth in winter. Like softness after grief. And it grows through choice. Small ones. Telling the truth when it would be easier to lie. Showing up when you'd rather disappear. Starting again. Not because you know what you're doing, but because something inside you still wants to try. These moments don't feel grand. They don't look heroic, but they're the moments where authorship begins. Psychologist Martin Seligman coined the term learned helplessness, when people or animals, after repeated failure or punishment, stop trying to escape or improve their situation, even when freedom becomes possible. This applies not just to trauma victims, but to everyday people who've been told over and over that they don't have a say. In families, in schools, in relationships, eventually you stop trying. It's not because you're weak, but because the effort no longer seems to matter. Existentialism responds to this with a terrifying, liberating idea. You are always choosing, even in surrender, even in stillness, even in despair. The choice may not be conscious, okay? It may be shaped by fear or fatigue, but it's still a choice, okay? Once you see that, really see it, you can begin to choose differently, okay? You can shift the story from why does this matter to what matters to me, okay? From what am I supposed to do to what am I willing to try. That shift doesn't make life easier, but it makes it yours. You don't need a reason to keep going. You don't need to be brave or brilliant or broken in the right way. You don't need to have all the pieces. You just need to begin. And if you've already begun, if you're here, reading this, feeling this, then maybe you already know. The story doesn't have to be perfect. The arc doesn't have to resolve. Okay, the meaning isn't waiting at the end. It's right here, in how you carry the weight, okay? In how you choose, again and again, not to stop becoming, even if no one notices, even if no one understands, even if all you're doing is pushing the same boulder up the same hill, and finding a way to smile anyway. You are not a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. You are not a question looking for an answer. You're a person trying, existing, becoming, and that's enough. We spend so much time waiting for life to tell us what we are, waiting for the grand sign, the permission slip, the moment it all makes sense. But maybe you don't need a reason. Maybe you don't need a script. Maybe you just need to feel the ground beneath your feet and begin walking. You're allowed to let go of the story that told you who you had to be. You're allowed to lay down the pressure to be extraordinary, to be heroic, to be right all the time. You are not a failed protagonist. You're not broken because your arc didn't follow the usual path. You're human, soft, in progress, still learning. So maybe the question isn't, what was I meant to become? Maybe the question is, what kind of meaning do I want to build right here with what I have? You are not powerless. You are not late. You are not missing anything that can't be grown from within. All your life, people may have told you that meaning lives somewhere far away, in destiny, in purpose, in success. But what if the truth is this? You were never missing a purpose. You were always missing permission, right? So if this moment moved something in you, if something quiet inside of you stirred as we spoke, I invite you to write it down. In the comments, tell us what part of this resonated, what story you're letting go of, or what kind of life you want to write with your own hand from here. That small act, putting it into words, is powerful, because expression is a form of ownership. It's how you stop waiting and start becoming. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Threads of Self, because this journey doesn't end here, and neither do you. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, you don't need a script to matter. You just need to keep showing up.